Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome back to Opus Magnum with Lyte. Today, I want to talk about having a combined metric for how good a particular solution is. Because as this game stands at the moment, whenever you go into any particular puzzle, you've got 3 different criteria on which you're judged, and you try to get a solution that's the best in any given area. Sometimes you combine cost and area, but rarely do you combine cycles with either of the other two, because it's often impossible. And so you end up pushing for cycles and forgetting about cost and area, or shooting for cost and area and forgetting about cycles. So I've come up with an idea for a combined metric that I think represents well what we're going for in these situations. And if you have a metric of your own, feel free to let me know. I would love to see all the different ways people want to represent a good solution. And my example is just one possibility. There are tons of metrics, there are tons of statistics, there are tons of things you can do. Mine is just what I think is good. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what goes into the solutions and how we can combine that into a reasonable number. The biggest problem that you run across is the fact that cost, cycles, and area are measured on completely different scales. When you try to combine things with different units, you run into issues. So what we need to do is make the units essentially the same. Well, how do you do that? The cost is measured in G's, the cycles are measured in cycles. Well, if you take the G's and divide by G's, you get nothing. You get just a percentage. You get a ratio that is unitless. So you have a cost and divide it by some other cost, you get a unitless value. Same goes for cycles. If you divide it by some other number of cycles, area divided by some other amount of area, you get a unitless quantity, which is the percentage difference from some amount. So, well, which amount do you use? Well, for the moment, let's assume you're using the minimum possible. So the minimum cost. The cheapest you could possibly solve this with is 40G. Okay? And then assume you know the minimum area. In this case, 7. And assume you know the minimum number of cycles. The insalinator does it in 17. Might be optimal, might not. Probably is, but might not be. I don't know. Well, let's assume you know. So you take the insalinator. You've got 200G divided by 40G is 5. Not 5G, just 5. Then you take the 17 cycles, divide by 17 cycles, or 16, whatever you want. And you end up with 1, or slightly more than 1. And then you take the area of 15 divided by 7, you get slightly more than 2. Okay? Well, what do you then do with those? Because since they're proportions, you probably don't want to add them. Adding proportions is weird. It tends not to give you what you expect. However, multiplying proportions tends to give you other proportions. Feels like a worthwhile track to go down. But going straight across, if you take the proportion, cost, and cycles and area and just multiply them straight across, well, you're kind of giving more oomph to the size of the solution, particularly when working with a solution that has small cost and area, like the hexagon here. You're giving too much weight to how compact it is. You're double counting the compactness because the cost and the area, particularly in small problems, are highly correlated. And so we need the cycles to push a little bit harder. And another way of thinking about this is that the cost in G's is a cost. The area is also a cost. Whereas the cycles are the product. So you want to match a cycles with a cost and a cycles with an area. So we have 2 cycles. So we take the cost, the cycles twice, not 2 cycles, cycles times cycles, and then the area. So cost times cycles times area. But I know you're thinking, Lyte. Whoa, whoa, whoa. But don't you have to divide by the optimal cost, the optimal cycle, and the optimal area? How am I even supposed to know what those are? But the great thing about this method is you don't need to know. They are a constant. You may or may not know what they are, but they're a constant. And if you divide this solution by a constant, and you divide some other solution by a constant, you're not suddenly going to have this solution be worse than the other one because you used a new constant. If you divide it by 3, let's say Insalinator is worth 9 points, and Il Garbaggio's worth 6 points. Well, if you divide it by 3, Insalinator still beats Garbaggio 3-2. And it's true no matter what constant you divide by. You cannot change the ordering just by changing the constant. So we don't actually need it at all. It was just a conceptual thing to make you believe in the proportions. And you could always just take this guy and divide it by one of the others. Instead of the optimal, you could assume that this is something, and then you divide the Insalinator, 200 times 17 times 17 times 15, divided by 40, by 94, by 94, by 7. If it's greater than 1, then the Insalinator costs more to run, and the hexagon is better. If it's less than 1, the Insalinator is better. Proportions sometimes get a little sketchy, so let's do a nice concrete example. Let me grab my calculator, and let's take a look. So, for example, and one thing that'll also make it easier, because you've got yourself 200 times 17 times 17 times 15. That's a huge number. 867,000. It's not a friendly number. So what we're going to do is take the log of it. And it'll make a nice, manageable size number. 5.9. You can remember 5.9. And so that was the Insalinator. And keep in mind, we're trying to get a low number here. So the Insalinator is really fast, but really expensive and kind of big. And then we want to compare it with the hexagon. So we clear off our calculator. We take 40 times 94 times 94 times 7. So it's very compact, very cheap, but pretty darn slow. Now, you know right off the bat that 2.4 million is worse than 867,000, but it's easier to compare 5.9 with 6.3. Well, 6.4. And so we've got a nice small number that we can deal with. The larger the number, the worse the solution. And then if we're really crazy, we can look at the caterpillar, which is an objectively bad solution. 560 times 108 times 108 times 157. Yikes. We're in the billions now. Take the log. It's 9. That's the beauty of logs. When things get absurdly large, the log of it is still relatively small. Now, you can use log base 10 as this calculator is. You could use log base E like various other calculators do. Log base 2, whatever log you feel like using, it'll shrink it down. And so long as that log was used to generate the numbers for all of the other things you're comparing, again, not going to change their relationship. If it was winning before, after taking the log of both, the same log of both, it'll still be winning. It gives you a nice, well-defined order, and it gives, at least to me, a subjective sense of accurate comparisons. Because if we did not double the cycles, we would have 200 times 17 times 15. 51,000 for the Insalinator versus 40 times 94 times 7. This is trying to say that the hexagon is twice as good as the Insalinator. And I'm sorry, it just isn't. So, this is the hexagon. It's incredibly slow. It is compact. It is cheap. But it's just not as good. As the Insalinator, which generates things incredibly fast and is still not that big. So if we were to take the hexagon and get 5 of them running in parallel, they would cost the same. Grab our calculator. We take our 94 divided by 17. Well, actually, 94 divided by 5. 18.8 cycles is the comparable result for using the hexagon. But instead of taking up 15 area, it takes up 35. So to me, the hexagon is the clear loser. And so let's see. Well, I mean, even if we did the multiplication on the hexagon, it would still be a clear loser because the area was bigger. But that's the sort of thing that I want my metric to show, and it'll let us examine all of the different problems and see how the different solutions compare. When you've got something like this where it's not entirely obvious which is better, because it's more than double the cost, but it's also more than twice as fast. So you just grab your trusty calculator. 40 times 179 times 179 times 6 gives you 7.6 million, which is 6.9. Which I imagine is pretty easy for you to remember. And then you take 100 by 63 times 63 times 9. Take that log. It's only 6.6, which is less than 6.9. So in my metric, the prestidigitation solution to refined gold is better than the sorcerer. So we open prestidigitation and look at it go. Turns lead into gold about as fast as you're going to manage it. Whereas the sorcerer, much like the hexagon, it's pretty darn slow. Just has the one arm, though. Takes up a nice small amount of space. But in the end, the other one is worth the investment. And that's what we're trying to say here, is which things are really worth the investment. And establishing a reliable way of expressing that, such that going forward, we can actually work towards optimizing this shared value, as opposed to just optimizing each one separately. Now, to be fair, we're still going to optimize each one separately. We're still going to do that because that's still fun. But having that third combined thing to push us in a different direction, I think is going to be a lot of fun. So if you do decide to use this metric for comparing things, make sure you are very specific about which log you are using. Because if one person tries it with log base E and you use log base 10, you're going to get very different results. Very different. And then some programmer is going to use log base 2 and yet another complication arises. So if you ever do communicate it with somebody else, make sure you specify which logarithm you're using to shrink it down, because if you don't use the logs, the numbers just get way too big. But thank you for listening in on my ideas regarding this combined metric. Not entirely certain what to call it. But either way, I will see you in the next episode of Opus Magnum with Lyte.